Order. We start with questions to the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Jim Shannon.
Question number 1.
Minister.
I thank the honourable member for raising this issue. Whilst energy costs have come down, they remain too high, and our priority is to ensure that access to energy is affordable and secure for consumers. This is why this government has established Great British Energy, which will operate across the whole of the UK, including Northern Ireland, and the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero and the Northern Ireland Department for Economy are working together positively on the GB Energy Bill.
Jim Shannon.
Thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to see the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland in her place, and I wish her well. We've had a friendship for some time. The Secretary of State will be aware of Northern Ireland's unique energy profile, where we are heavily dependent and reliant on oil as opposed to other nations across the United Kingdom. I think it's 68% of people in Northern Ireland use oil. Has the Minister of State taken into consideration when determining to cut winter fuel allowance? And what discussions were had with the Northern Ireland Executive in relation to doing so? Mr. Speaker, thank you.
Of course, I am aware that 2/3 of Northern Ireland homes use oil. The decision to means test winter fuel payments was not a decision the government wished to make, but was a result of the Conservative £22 billion worth of black hole. In Northern Ireland, the Executive has decided that winter fuel payments will continue to be paid to pension households with someone receiving pension credits. Now, I've checked the figures, and in Northern Ireland, an estimated over 26,000 people could be eligible for pension credits and the winter fuel payment, but are not receiving it. So I would encourage anyone who's eligible or knows someone who could be to check and apply if you can.
Clive James.
Number 2, Mr. Speaker.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take questions 2 and 11 together. Northern Ireland is a great place to live, work and invest, something I and the Secretary of State have promoted in our over 120 visits and meetings. Growth is a key mission of this government, which is why we're supporting UK businesses through securing further investment and through our industrial strategy. The Chancellor will set out steps this government is taking to support growth across the UK on the 30th of October.
Clive Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Businesses in Northern Ireland are struggling to operate in a constantly shifting regulatory environment that is deterring investment and decreasing business confidence. It's no wonder that 1/3 of UK businesses want the government to reduce Brexit-related barriers like customs procedures, according to a recent survey by Santander. A starting point would be for agricultural trade. And so can the Minister update the House on progress in negotiating a new veterinary and plant health agreement with the EU?
I thank the member for raising this. Northern Ireland has recently secured, many businesses have secured excellent deals in Northern Ireland. EY bringing over 1,000 jobs, the Ballymena Bus Factory, Wright Bus, Hannah Farmer are some of those examples. We are working at pace on the veterinary agreement. We do want to reduce checks and the need for checks, doing all that we can to protect the UK internal market. This government has brought in economic stability in place of the economic chaos that we saw up to now, and Northern Ireland businesses will be the benefits of those.
Mayhew.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm grateful for the Minister for her response. But it's all very well talking about an industrial strategy, but economists agree that if you increase national insurance contributions for employers, it reduces profits, reduces pay and leads to fewer jobs. So does the Minister agree that if a government does decide to raise taxes, perhaps to fund union pay rises, then employer national insurance contributions would be the last tax that you would choose if you want to support the Northern Irish economy?
It's hard to take lectures from the party opposite on investment and growth. We have had a change election. We will be investing in growth. Whatever is coming up in the budget, the member has only a week to wait to listen to what will be happening in the budget. In the meantime, we're going at pace. The International Investment Summit brought in considerable investment for companies that are based in Northern Ireland. We are moving on our industrial strategy, Invest 2035. We're investing in skills and getting people into work and transforming our health services, which is essential so that people who want to come to the Northern Ireland because of good health services and are well enough to work. All of this is a package for investment in Northern Ireland.
Chair of the committee, Tonia Antoniazzi.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, At last week's International Investment Summit, the Prime Minister and Chancellor announced a total of £63 billion of private investment into the UK economy. But what steps are the Secretary of State and the Minister for Northern Ireland taking to ensure that Northern Ireland is at the forefront of this government's efforts to stimulate that investment that's needed?
The Secretary of State went to the International Summit with the First Minister and Deputy First Minister and are working together. The Ballymena bus manufacturer Wrightbus recently signed a deal of £100 billion to supply more than 1,000 buses to go ahead. That shows real business confidence in Northern Ireland. And the skills gap is another area we are really focusing on. I've met with wonderful skills providers across Northern Ireland to talk about how we get people into well-paid jobs and faster growth.
Kevin Bonavia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's very good to hear from the Minister about the work being done to close the skills gap. Could the Minister provide further examples and her intentions going forward?
My honourable friend is quite right to raise the issue of the skills gap and economic inactivity in Northern Ireland. I have met with wonderful skills providers across Northern Ireland. For example, the Rural Women's Network, Bolster Community Care, Superstars, Disability Action NI, Ulster University and the Prince's Trust. There is a wealth of work being done on good skills support, and we in the UK Government want to work with the Executive to continue to support this. A reliable, bespoke skills offering is essential to future-proof Northern Ireland's key growth sectors.
Shadow Minister Paul Holmes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister talks about growth, but the Mid-South West region growth deal, which was paused by this government, now lies inactive with no direction, and reports that much-needed private sector business involvement is now withdrawing. Will the Minister accept that this government's handling of these growth deals and their pausing was haphazard? Will she apologise to the people affected, and will she enter urgent direct talks with businesses to get this back off the ground?
The Secretary of State and I are in constant talks with the deals and the deal providers. I know the value of both of these deals across Northern Ireland, not just to those regions affected. However, the government faces a £22 billion black hole, and it's right that the Treasury considers all options on the table to address this, and we'll find out more in the budget just next week. The Mid-South West and the Causeway, Coast and Glens deals are being considered as part of the spending review, and the Government continues to work closely with the deals partners and the Executive, and I will continue with the Secretary of State to underline the importance of these deals to my ministerial colleagues in the Treasury.
Gavin Robinson.
We look forward to a positive conclusion to those discussions next week, and as the Minister knows, both representatives from the Mid-South West region deal and Causeway, Coast and Glens deal are in Westminster today. Can the Minister acknowledge that in working with businesses and in trying to encourage greater trade within our own country, the appointment of a chair of Intertrade UK was an important first step, but that work needs to start? The terms of reference need to be set, and business need to be able to engage with that body established to support trade within our country.
I agree with the Right Honourable Member that the need for Intertrade UK to get going and to work to encourage investment across between all of the regions and nations in the UK, and it will be very important for those terms of reference to be set, and we are working with them as fast as we can now that the chair is in place.
Gavin Robinson.
The Minister for that. The Minister will know that in discussions with her Cabinet colleagues, decisions have been taken to delay the agreement on parcels, to delay the agreement on customs, to avoid taking the decision on UK-wide labelling, and of course there are a myriad of other decisions that were made and supported by this House and supported by the then Labour Party that are required to be implemented from the Safeguarding the Union documents. She will know about the interface between trade and constitutional politics, and so can I urge her to engage with the Secretary of State, the Paymaster General and others within Cabinet to get on and deliver what business and the people of Northern Ireland need.
We are not alone as ministers to have faced all sorts of decisions that should have been taken by the previous government when we came into office 3 months ago. We have taken up those decisions on parcels, on every aspect that he mentions. He's right to raise them because we do need to work on these to ensure that we protect the UK internal market and ensure the best regime for business is possible.
Jim Allister.
Question 3.
Secretary of State.
The statutory instrument for the Northern Ireland Pet Travel Scheme has now been laid. The scheme significantly reduces the requirements associated with the original Northern Ireland Protocol and provides a stable and long-term arrangement for those travelling with their pets within the UK.
Jim Allister.
When the grip of EU law controls even the movement of our pets within the United Kingdom, isn't it clear we've gone far too far in regarding Northern Ireland as EU territory? For that is the reason for this absurd regulation, which at the behest of the EU imposes passport pets if you want to bring your pet from GB to Northern Ireland. There's no point in the Secretary of State saying it could have been worse. It shouldn't exist at all. When will this government get the EU off our backs and liberate the people of Northern Ireland and our pets from EU diktat?
Well, as I hope the honourable gentleman is aware, Northern Ireland pet owners will not face any checks and will not be required to hold a pet travel document. So I think in discussing this, there is an obligation on him and all of us to make sure that we present the facts so that people are not unnecessarily troubled.
Shadow Secretary of State Alex Burghardt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The Executive's draft programme for government acknowledges that policing numbers in Northern Ireland are an all-time low, situation that Chief Constable Boucher has described dangerous. The draft programme commits to increasing numbers in line with New Decade, New Approach. Is the Secretary of State convinced that the Budget Sustainability Plan is sufficient to achieve that aim?
Actually, I'm not quite sure it fits in with the question.
I was intending to come in on question 4.
Well, I think we'll wait then. Right, let us move on then. Dr. Lauren Sullivan.
Number 4, please, Mr. Speaker.
Now, where were we, Mr. Speaker? With permission, I will answer questions 4, 7 and 10 together. I welcome the publication of the Northern Ireland Executive's Budget Sustainability Plan, a positive and necessary step towards sustainable public finances, and the Chief Secretary to the Treasury has agreed with the Northern Ireland Finance Minister that discussions over a long-term fiscal framework for Northern Ireland can now begin.
Sullivan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does the Secretary of State agree to ensure sustainable finances? The Northern Ireland Executive needs to take steps to reform the NHS and public services.
I certainly do share my honourable friend's view, because as the House will be aware, people in Northern Ireland face the longest waiting lists in the whole of the United Kingdom, and all governments, including the Northern Ireland Executive, have to balance the money they've got coming in, the funds that they can raise, and to take decisions about public service reform. I'm very encouraged by the recent event organised by the Northern Ireland Health Minister, at which Dr Ben Gower, who produced a report on reform in Northern Ireland, returned, because there is now a commitment to take forward that process.
Deirdre Costigan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What impact does the Secretary of State think the UK leaving the European Convention on Human Rights would have on the sustainability of Northern Ireland's finances and devolved government?
Well, I say to my honourable friend that given that the European Convention of Human Rights is the foundation, one of the foundations of the Good Friday Agreement, I am frankly astonished that anyone who aspires to lead His Majesty's opposition should suggest that we should leave as a country the ECHR. It would be utterly irresponsible.
David Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to commend all those who worked to re-establish devolved government earlier this year at Stormont, but it's now vital that the Northern Ireland Executive ensures it has sustainable finances. So does the Secretary of State agree with me that revenue raising by the Northern Ireland Executive has an important part to play in delivering financial sustainability and stability to Northern Ireland?
I do, Mr. Speaker, and indeed raising £113 million was part of the deal that the last government put in place as part of the £3.3 billion package that led to the that followed on the restoration of the executive, and that includes delivering a balanced budget in the current year. And I'm very encouraged by the statements of the Northern Ireland Finance Minister in that regard.
Mr Speaker, the budget sustainability plan is commendable, but would the Secretary of State agree with me that our public services are in crisis? Our roads are crumbling, we have the longest health waiting lists in the whole of the UK, and our schools need investment. Therefore, Northern Ireland needs to be in receipt of a fair, long-term funding allocation based on Treasury needs. And will he confirm to this House that he is making the case for that in Treasury for the people of Northern Ireland?
Well, the greater needs that Northern Ireland has for spending are recognised. That is why the Northern Ireland Fiscal Council was established, to answer the question, what should the level of that additional funding be? And they came to the conclusion the figure should be 124%, which is going to be met this year in respect to the budget. And the interim fiscal framework also said if further credible sources come along suggesting it should be a different figure, then the government would undertake to look at that. But nothing takes away from the executive's responsibility to manage the budget that it has got and to take decisions, including on reform.
Alex Easton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Does Secretary of State agree with me that the resources for the budget for the Justice Minister are extremely short and that we are not able to recruit enough PSNI officers? Has he had any discussions with the Justice Minister how we're going to resolve that problem?
Well, as the honourable member will be aware, decisions about the allocation of the Northern Ireland budget rest with the Northern Ireland Executive. Funds go to the Justice Minister. The Justice Minister then decides principally how much to pass on to the Policing Board for policing costs and how much to deal with the justice system and the prisons, which are also under pressure. I recognise the pressures that PSNA officers face, not least because I met a number of them who were injured in the recent disorder.
Secretary of State Alex Burkhardt.
Very generous of you to call me again, Mr Speaker. The Executive's draft programme for government acknowledges that policing numbers in Northern Ireland are at an all-time low, a situation which the Chief Constable has described as dangerous. The draft programme commits to increasing numbers in line with New Decade, New Approach. Is the Secretary of State convinced that the budget sustainability plan is sufficient to achieve that aim?
Well, the honourable gentleman raises a very important point, as we've just discussed a moment ago. I recognise the pressures that are on the PSNI, but it does fall to the executive to decide, out of the funds it has available, how much it's going to allocate for policing alongside other needs for public services in Northern Ireland. And if they wish to allocate more, they're in a position to do so, but it does involve making a choice.
The Secretary of State is, of course, right that policing in Northern Ireland is a devolved issue, but national security is not. If we look at policing right now at an all-time low, we're reminded that his party's manifesto made explicit commitments to improve public services in Northern Ireland. Will the government commit to ensure that there is policing in Northern Ireland sufficient to keep the people of Northern Ireland safe and to maintain national security? And will he commit to protect the additional security funding of £32 million a year that comes direct from HMT?
Well, on the latter point that the honourable gentleman raises, he just has to wait a week to see what the budget produces. But I would simply say to him that the PSNI and the security services and others do an outstanding job in Northern Ireland protecting the people of Northern Ireland from terrorist threats, and we should all support them in that endeavour.
Democrat spokesperson Al Pinkerton.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Budget Sustainability Plan highlights that Northern Ireland has been systemically underfunded, with the Fiscal Council estimating a shortfall of between 300 to 4 million annually since 2022. Meanwhile, the Northern Ireland Executive reported a 559 million overspend between 2022 and 24. Can the Secretary of State outline what measures the government is taking and will take to address Northern Ireland's immediate budgetary pressures, ensure long-term financial stability, equitable funding and, crucially, guarantee sustainable public services?
Well, in addition to the £3.3 billion that was the package following the restoration of the Executive gained an additional £185 million in July when the main estimates were published. And in order to avoid having to repay the debt that the honourable member refers to, they have to put their finances on a sustainable path, deliver a balanced budget and raise the additional revenue, £130 million, that they committed to do when the deal was done. The Fiscal Council's view is 124% to the right funding.
For 5, Mr. Speaker.
The Government is committed to implementing the Windsor Framework in good faith and to protecting Northern Ireland's place in the UK internal market. We continue to take forward policies set out in safeguarding the Union, including most recently the establishment of the Independent Monitoring Panel and the publication of guidance under Section 46 of the UK Internal Market Act.
Robin Swan.
Concern in regard to the supply of medicines again to Northern Ireland. The British Generic Medicines Association says there's an absurd situation where shortages will be due to bureaucracy because of the UK-only labelling that is required for medicines going into Northern Ireland. Mr. Speaker, the government say they're relaxed that that deadline will be made. Is the Secretary of State relaxed in regards to the continued supply of medicines coming into Northern Ireland?
Well, I would say to the Honourable Gentleman it's really important that medicines that are required continue to be supplied. The industry has had quite a period of time to make arrangements to ensure that the labelling rules are met, and I hope very much in the time that is available, those companies that haven't done so will do so.
Sammy Wilson.
Question number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Having carefully considered the results of the consultation with industry, the Government decided not to proceed with the introduction of mandatory not-for-EU labelling in Great Britain from the 1st of October 2024. Instead, we will take the powers necessary to apply not-for-EU labelling in the future if that is required to secure supplies in Northern Ireland.
Samuel Wilson.
The result of the Northern Ireland Protocol signed by the previous government has been to create an economic border between Northern Ireland and Great Britain, and also the imposition of EU law, which has created a problem for the supply of goods to Northern Ireland. The Labour Party, when in opposition, supported the idea of food labelling as a way of avoiding an interruption of supply of food goods from GB to Northern Ireland. Why has the government now reneged on a promise which it supported in opposition, and what will be the trigger for this imposition if it's needed?
Well, the consultation on UK-wide labelling led the industry to say this will impose huge cost on us and therefore cost on consumers, raising the price of goods. The purpose is to ensure that goods are not delisted in Northern Ireland. That is why we are going to take the power to ensure that if there is any evidence that that is happening, then the labelling requirements that were set out in safeguarding the Union can be applied, including on individual products on a sectoral basis.
Just a second, come back to Josh Newbury. He's just going to ask his question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Businesses in my constituency of Cannock Chase tell me they're facing increased red tape and costs when importing from or exporting to Northern Ireland. So could the Secretary of State confirm that he is committed to unfettered access for goods moving from Northern Ireland to Great Britain?
I certainly can confirm that, and it indeed is set out in legislation in the UK Internal Market Act.
Claire Hamble.
Mr. Speaker.
Minister.
I congratulate my honourable friend on her new role as the leader of the SDLP, and I thank her for raising this really important issue. 7 women and girls have been killed violently in Northern Ireland this year alone. This is devastating. I've discussed the importance of action on violence against women and girls with the First and the Deputy First Minister, and I welcome the Northern Ireland Executive making this a priority in their programme for government and the new strategic framework.
Claire Hannah.
Thank you, Minister. Mary Ward in my constituency became the 4th woman to be murdered in just 6 weeks in Northern Ireland. It remains one of the most dangerous places in Europe to be a woman, with a femicide rate that is twice the rate of that of Britain, and we need to think very deeply about the type of society we have created that is manifesting in this way. The publication of the Northern Ireland Strategy on Violence Against Women recently was overdue and very welcome. Does the Minister agree with me that the funding and human resources attached to that strategy must be proportionate with the urgency and the deep roots of this issue, and will she support the Executive as they review the sentencing and judicial processes that are contributing to these very preventable deaths.
My thoughts are with the family and friends and all those affected by the murder of Mary Ward. Every woman deserves to feel safe. There is what's been called an epidemic of violence against women and girls in Northern Ireland, and I do join with the member in welcoming the new strategy. We need stronger action by the justice system, more support for frontline services, tackling harassment wherever it is, in homes, schools, workplaces and on our streets, and challenging and changing misogynistic attitudes and behaviours. That will need urgent action, working together. This government stands ready to do this.
Sir David Davis.
I don't normally get such a cheer, sir. Number 9.
I meet regularly with the Chief Constable and his team to discuss a range of issues. While the Chief Constable has operational independence, the Investigatory Powers Commissioner's Office provides oversight of these powers to ensure that their use is necessary, proportionate and in accordance with the law.
David Davis.
Well, in a recent Investigatory Powers Tribunal, it became apparent that the Northern Ireland Police Force had been caught surveilling journalists' telephones on the basis that they had received secret documents from whistleblowers. The reason for the secrecy of those documents was to cover up the embarrassment of the RUC and the handling of the Loughlin Island massacre. Will he meet me to discuss the future use of surveillance powers by the Northern Ireland Police?
Well, I am indeed aware of the background to this case, and the original search warrants were quashed. And the police investigation was discontinued. The Investigatory Powers Tribunal, as the Right Honourable Gentleman will know, is currently looking at this specific case. It would not be appropriate for me to comment while that's ongoing. The Chief Constable has set up the McCullough Review to look at the wider issue, and the Right Honourable Gentleman may well wish to make representations to that.